Hello and welcome, it's AJ here, Aussie Guy Studio on my own today for New York Jets preview. I'm going to be talking to Michael Nania in a second. He is a writer for Gangrene Nation, Elite Sports New York, and also is on the Cool Your Jets podcast, which you can find at CYJ Pod. And you can find him on Twitter at Michael_Nania, Nania. I'll go and get him on the line and we're going to dive into the Jets. So we've got Michael on the line. A warm welcome, Michael. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
Not a problem. Let's talk New York Jets and fair bit of movement around the organisation, really, and really it starts at the top. I might actually, first of all, ask you about how you feel about the changes at coach, really. I mean, Adam Gase coming into the building, and I guess the big shock was Mike Maccagnan getting fired and Gase essentially becoming interim GM. So how are you feeling about that whole sort of shuffle?
Yeah, so first with Adam Gase, the whole coaching process was a really interesting one. I think we all knew Todd Bowles was going to be out after the season with the way everything kind of collapsed mid-season. There were a lot of issues. Defensively, they were disappointing, and just overall it was time for a change. He had missed the playoffs 5 years in a row and had 4 straight losing seasons, so it was time for him, or 3 straight losing seasons after having the 10-6 season 2015. So it was time for him to go. I think most people expected that, but it was interesting how they initially just fired Bowles, didn't fire Maccagnan. I think a lot of people hoped they would just clean the slate entirely, but they didn't do that. They stuck with Maccagnan initially, and they went with Adam Gase, and it was a hire that I think the fan base initially was skeptical of, but as is usually the case, we've all rationalized it. I think the fan base has really warmed up to Gase. He's a really football-first guy. He's not really quotable, but he does have more energy than Todd Bowles does, and he's a guy who in press conferences is going to be a little more in-depth with just his football talk than I think Bowles was, and I think fans really like that. I think they like his hard-nosed mentality, and he's also an offensive guy, which the Jets haven't had in a long time. They had Todd Bowles, Rex Ryan, Eric Mangini, all defensive-first head coaches, so to have Gase is a really good change of pace. Obviously, the NFL is going in a direction in which offense is really kind of taking over defense, just in terms of teams that are great offensively are tending to be more successful than teams that are the opposite. So the Jets kind of going with that trend, going offensive. And also Gase is a young guy too. He's only 40 years old, I believe. So going young, going offense is a really good change of pace for the Jets that I think all fans are really fond of and have supported, even though there are questions about what Gase did in Miami. His exit there was had a little bit of trouble, and now going out there just in terms of clashing with the ownership there. Some of the players said some questionable things about him, but it really does seem like Gase has learned from some of those mistakes. He seems like he has some really good relationships with the players growing already, and obviously we'll see how that stands up going into 1 season and 2 seasons, how they handle losing streaks and any kind of turmoil. We'll see how it actually happens when it matters, but so far Gase has really checked all the boxes. There's been no drama. I think fans really like having a young offensive guy at the helm, so we'll see how it turns out, because it ultimately comes down to wins. But so far, Gase has done a pretty good job kind of answering the questions he came in with. But again, we'll see how that goes. But then the general manager position. So Mike Maccagnan had an offseason that I think fans were okay with, and that the Jets really needed to have. They had a lot of cap space. They had a lot of holes. Really needed some top-end talent on this team. But mostly because Mike Maccagnan drafted so poorly is why the team needed talent so much, why they had so much cap space, because they didn't have any good players of their own to re-sign. But he did what he needed to do. He went out and got Le'Veon Bell, got C.J. Mosley, made the trade for Kelechi Osemele, so he added some top-end talent, Jameson Crowder as well, so he did what he needed to do, spent that cap space in smart ways on positions of need. The Jets needed help for Sam Darnold. With him on his rookie deal, with the Jets having a really poor run game last season, obviously running back alone can't fix that. It's going to come down to the O-line, but Le'Veon Bell was a signing the Jets really needed to make, just with how much the devoid of talent they had offensively, because at receiver they're deep, but they don't have that number one guy. Chris Herndon is exciting at tight end, but he's going to be suspended. We don't know how great he can be yet, even though he's good. So to get Le'Veon Bell, the best overall player on the free agent market, a guy who's a good pass protector, a guy who's really patient, doesn't get stuffed. Getting stuffed a lot was a huge issue for Jets running backs last year, and Le'Veon Bell is great at avoiding those, so that should help Sam Darnold stay ahead of the chains. Getting C.J. Mosley was huge, a guy who should really help stabilize a defense that has had a lot of communication issues, and he's just an overall elite player, both coverage, run defense, tackling, playmaking, all around. He is a stud as well. So going on free agency, spending too much money is never going to fix everything in and of itself, but the Jets did have a lot of cap space to spend that if they didn't use, they weren't going to have anything to use it on anyway. So I think they went out and spent it well. So Maccagnan did a good job with that. And in the draft, he took Quinnen Williams at number 3 overall, which was the pick to make. And he has had some luck with in the top of the first round, having some really good talent fall to him with Leonard Williams, Jamal Adams, and now Quinnen Williams. So that was the right pick to make. He took Ja'Kai Polite in the 3rd round, which was a pick that I think a lot of people are excited about, to finally have some edge rushing potential with this team, something they haven't had in a while. So he had an overall solid offseason, one that I think most people really supported, but then the firing came absolutely out of nowhere. And just the timing of it was really weird. It's something you don't see very often. I think the Browns did it recently, I believe, with John Dorsey, and then he went to the Chiefs. But it is something that you don't really see too often, so it definitely took a lot of flack for that. But at the same time, Maccagnan he drafted very poorly over his 4 years there. He's probably one of the bottom 3 drafting GMs in the league. So it's not like even though his offseason was pretty good on paper, he still didn't have much success in the draft over his 4 years there. Team didn't make the playoffs while he was there. So the Jets weren't moving on from a guy who had helped them achieve much success, but the timing was very odd. It did kind of show that their process at the beginning of the offseason was a little bit weird, not firing Maccagnan at the beginning, but ultimately Maccagnan did set them up pretty well going forward. They still got rid of a guy who wasn't a great drafter, didn't have a great body of work there. So, and they get Joe Douglas, a guy who by all accounts is one of the top available names, and a guy who should do a really good job, did a great job in Philly, Baltimore, Chicago. So I think going forward, Jets fans are really comfortable with where this team is at, even though there was a lot of drama with how it went down, just hiring Adam Gase initially when Maccagnan was fired. We'll see how it all plays out this season. But as of right now, I think Jets fans have really warmed up to these two guys and are comfortable with having them at the top going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you never want your team to kind of quote unquote win free agency in a way, but that certainly the names that the Jets signed, it's impressive, and they make you instantly better. You mentioned Lev Bell, Ty Montgomery, Jamison Crowder, Kelechi Osemele is fantastic, C.J. Mosley. And without much losses either. I mean, the losses were just kind of, whatever. I mean, Isaiah Crowell, Josh McCown, and a few others. It wasn't sort of a big impact. And I did like the draft too. Trevon Wesco is a good pickup. He's a pretty strong tight end. And Blake Cashman's not bad in the 5th either, really.
Yeah, those 2 picks I definitely really like. Cashman is a guy who I think people were kind of questioning why they would take a linebacker at that spot after they just signed Mosley, and they have Avery Williamson starting opposite him. But he's a guy who I think was expected to go a lot higher and was really productive in college. So, and I think he's been standing out so far in camp. So he could be the top backup and inside linebacker. You could see him in sub packages for his coverage ability, coming in as a weak side linebacker if the Jets go some 4 linebacker sets, some 4-3 sets. So he's really interesting. That I think he could be a low-key really good pick. And Trevon Wesco in the 4th round, the Jets, Chris Herndon is going to be suspended for the first 4 games, so they're going to need some help while he's out. And Wesco is a guy who His blocking is really his calling card and what got him into this league. You watch him as a blocker, and he's a huge guy. He's over 280 pounds, so
Oof.
he's a borderline offensive
Yeah.
lineman. So, but you watch him block too. It's not just his power or his size. He's a really good fundamental blocker. He knows where to be, when to be there, and his hand fighting is really good as a blocker. So he should be able to be a force for a long time just with that alone. But he has some receiving upside too. For a 280 plus pound guy, he moves pretty well. He made some plays in the screen game at West Virginia. He has pretty good hands too. So receiving isn't his game because, just being so big, it's going to be hard for him to create some separation. But he is a guy who you could give that surprise screen pass every once in a while, and he could do something with it, which is something the Jets have done with guys like Eric Tomlinson recently. But he's a guy who doesn't have really good hands and has dropped a lot of easy passes. But I think Wesco's a guy who you can give that surprise play every once in a while, and he's going to catch the ball with good consistency, make some plays. But overall, just as a blocker, I think he's going to make a huge impact, and that's going to be a really big help for an offensive line that has a lot of question marks. So having a guy and we've seen that in New England a lot. The Jets see it every single year. The Patriots always have tight ends that are really good at blocking, and that helps their offensive line a lot. That's why they're usually a pretty good running team, especially last year. And so having a guy like Wesco should definitely help with the absence of Chris Herndon early on, and just overall his blocking ability should really help boost the run game and an offensive line that has struggled quite a bit.
Yeah, so let's talk about the offense. Now, Sam Darnold, he's looking good. He's on the uptick. He really finished his rookie season on a high, and just like any rookie, he had some lowlights and some highlights. Certainly his Week 16 game against the Packers was a highlight, and I think the future looks bright. What are your feelings or what are your hopes with Sam Darnold?
Yeah, so the way he finished the season was definitely a huge confidence booster going forward. Those final 4 games were really good. He's top 10 in most metrics. I believe his PFF grade was number 1 over that span. His QBR was number 1, and his passer rating was top 10. He only had 1 interception over his final 4 games too, which was really good. But the game against those 2 games back to back in Week 16 or Week 15 and 16 at MetLife Stadium against the Texans and the Packers, in those 2 games, that's where he really shined. And the Texans one was on Saturday night, so that was a primetime game. But in those 2 games, he really put the team on his back. And the Jets lost both of those games, but neither one was his fault because the circumstances in those games were as bad as they were all season. The run game was really poor. I'm pretty sure they averaged under 3 yards a carry in both of those games. The offensive line was as bad as it was all season. They had injuries up front. They had made switches at center, at right tackle in the middle of the Texans game. So their circumstances weren't good. Quincy Enunwa was out as well. Darnold's throwing to Andre Roberts as a number 2 receiver, a guy who was a Pro Bowl kick returner last year, but definitely isn't a great receiver. So the circumstances weren't good, but Darnold put them on his back, and he really looked different after he went out due to the injury midseason. He had that game against the Dolphins where he really, really struggled, had the 4 picks. The Jets only scored 6 points. He missed 3 games due to injury, came back, and was a completely different player. It started with that game in Buffalo, his first game back, and he actually left that game for a series after taking a hit early on. But he came back and led on the road against one of the best defenses in the league, and in the coldest game that he's ever played in as a California guy. He came back from the locker room and led the team back to become the youngest quarterback to ever lead a game-winning drive, and he did it on the road against a really good Bills defense. So that was super impressive, but the 2 games after that was where he really showed out, went head-to-head with Deshaun Watson, head-to-head with Aaron Rodgers, and kept the Jets in those games, even with pretty much every other position group on the team really struggling. And the camaraderie he showed with Robbie Anderson and Chris Herndon in particular was really special. So when Herndon comes back, I think that those 2 guys could have a really special connection, because what Darnold does best, or his signature, is really what he's able to do extending plays, getting outside of the pocket and making those off-schedule plays when everything else breaks down. And Chris Herndon, his recognition of when Darnold was doing that, knowing when to break off of his route and try to make himself a target for Darnold outside the pocket, was really special. So those 2 guys had a good connection. And Robbie Anderson, he's a guy who's known for his deep speed, getting those 30, 40-plus yard bombs. But down the stretch, he's one of the most productive receivers in the league. I believe he was one of only, I think, 6 receivers to have 300 yards and 3 touchdowns over the final 4 games. And he was doing that without the deep ball. He didn't catch any deep bombs over those final 4 games, but he's still producing because in the red zone, he made 2 really good plays against the Bills and against the Texans, in which Darnold scrambled and made a couple of really incredible plays in which Anderson just broke off his route and got open. And that's something we haven't seen a lot of from Robbie Anderson. It's mostly been the deep game for him. He has not produced a lot in the red zone, but in back-to-back games, he had the 2 shortest yardage touchdowns of his career. He made a ton of plays on curl routes, out routes, a lot of intermediate stuff that we haven't seen a lot of from him. But with Darnold, those 2 guys were really clicking. So down the stretch, Darnold really improved, and I think he had a few games where he was really bad that kind of brought his numbers down against the Browns, the Jaguars, the Dolphins in that road game, and against the Vikings. In those 4 games in particular, he was really bad. That's just the only way to put it. He really struggled, but rookies have games like that, and overall, I think he had a lot more good games than bad. And just the high points he showed, stringing together those 4 games at the end was really good. And even in Week 17, even though the Jets got blown out by the Patriots, Darnold didn't have the best stat line. He still looked pretty good in that game. The Jets had a lot of drop passes in that game that made his stat line look worse. The offensive line wasn't good, but he just in terms of his processing and his decision-making, it was really good in that Patriots game. He definitely seemed to be, even though the production wasn't there, he seemed to be mentally and just in terms of how his confidence and overall wherewithal seemed to be continuing what he had been building over the previous 3 games. So to see him finish the season with 4 straight really solid games, including 2 elite games in the middle, is really promising after he had that rough stretch in the middle of the season.
Yeah, nice. And if we you've already mentioned some of them, but if we put all of his weapons together, obviously Lev Bell, who was, he was the prize of free agency, is a fantastic addition. And I mean, he's got fresh legs. He was obviously sitting last year, and he's also going to be, I think, fairly motivated to show the league, I suppose, the Steelers, but the league what he's got, and the fact that he is one of the best runners in the NFL, and is going to be great in terms of his hands, and will be, he'll catch a ton of balls. But the wide receiver core in general is super underrated. I mean, you mentioned Robbie Anderson, Quincy Enunwa, Jamison Crowder is a fantastic addition, pretty underrated addition. Yeah, the Chris Herndon suspension is unfortunate, but I mean, you put all those targets together. They're setting up what McCagnon, and Gase have really set up is a fantastic opportunity. I mean, they're really giving Darnold as much opportunity as they possibly can.
Yeah, for sure, and that's definitely a huge emphasis to give Darnold some help and take advantage of his rookie deal, and not just because of that, but because how much the team did struggle to support him last year. He was throwing he threw for more 3rd and longs, or a higher percentage of his passes last year were from 3rd and long than any other quarterback in the league. And that's obviously not ideal for a young quarterback trying to fulfill his potential. So they definitely gave him a lot of help. Le'Veon Bell was the best runner, or the best offensive player on the market, really. So they went out and got him. He's going to make an impact as a receiver. He could lead the team in receptions this year. If you look at his production versus the receivers on the team, he definitely could do that this year. And Adam Gase loves to use his running backs in the receiving game. Kenyon Drake had 5 receiving touchdowns under Gase last year for the Dolphins. So Bell should be a huge factor in the passing game. But Crowder, too, like you mentioned, he's an underrated addition. His numbers weren't great last year because he missed some time. The Redskins had a revolving door at quarterback, but he's a really talented slot receiver. He can do a lot of different things. He isn't just a guy who you can check the ball down to, a guy who just takes screens. He can do those things, but he's also a guy who can get up the seam and make some deep plays, something that you don't see a lot out of slot receivers. So he's really versatile. He can do a lot of things well, and he's already shown some camaraderie with Darnold in camp. That's reportedly been the connection at training camp so far, and they seem like a great match both with their skill sets. And Crowder's really good in the red zone too, so that should be a huge get because the Jets have struggled in the red zone. So to have Crowder should definitely help there. And like you mentioned, Enunwa, he's a really talented guy. He struggled with injuries. He missed 2017, missed a few games last year, but just physically, he's one of the most special, physically talented receivers in the league. A huge-bodied guy, a guy who's super strong, but also has really good straight line speed and with the ball in his hands is almost like a running back. He can put his head down and run through you. He can juke around you. He's got a stiff arm. He's in the open field. He's as dangerous as they come. But that's just not the only facet of his game. Back in 2016, when he had his career year, he caught for over 850 yards, even though Ryan Fitzpatrick was throwing to him in a season in which he was terrible. Anunoby is the best receiver on the Jets. He's arguably the best offensive player on the team that year, and is with the deep game on go routes, post routes. He was super, super efficient, and his ability to go up and get those deep passes and win those 50-50 balls was really impressive, but we didn't see a lot of that in 2018. Maybe injuries were a part of it, and early in the season, he was used mostly on screenplays, or pretty much entirely on screenplays. I think over a quarter of his targets last year were screen passes, which is extremely high. So hopefully he can stay healthy, first of all, but hopefully the Jets can get him going downfield more often, because that is a skill of his that we didn't see last year, but it's something that he has done really well in the past and can just add even more versatility to this offense. So like you mentioned, just the Jets don't have a DeAndre Hopkins or a Odell Beckham, a top-end number one guy, but they have a bunch of really solid players. Those three wide receivers all have their own skills that they are great at. Chris Herndon is a guy who, over the last 10 weeks of the season last year, was really a top 10 tight end in terms of his production. And Le'Veon Bell, who's arguably maybe the best receiving running back of all time. So it's a group that is really versatile, has 5 guys who are going to be fighting for targets. So it's going to be interesting to see how the numbers get divided up. But either way, someone's probably going to have to take a sacrifice in terms of stats. But all these guys should be able to complement each other really well and have an impact with all the different skills that they have.
Let's just briefly touch on the O-line. And my impression is, Kelechi Osemele is a fantastic addition. And the O-line in general seems to me, but I hope you might have a different opinion, but it seems to be fine, like maybe not the best O-line in the league, but far from the worst. Fine to good. Brian Winters, Jonathan Harrison, Kelvin Beachum, Brandon Shell are good. So, it looks like they should be able to, protect Darnold and open up some holes, I would think.
Yeah, so I think pass protection, they should be okay. They were they're below average in pass protection last year, but you add in Osemele, and I think Brandon Shell is a guy who should be able to progress a little bit more. Brian Winters should stay a little bit healthier. And also at center, Jonathan Harrison is a guy who hasn't started a lot in the league and still has some questions of his own to answer. But what the Jets got out of Spencer Long at center last year was about as bad as you can get at that position. The snapping was its own issue. And in the game where Darnold struggled through those 4 interceptions, Spencer Long was throwing his shotgun snaps in the second half of that game. Almost every single one was off the mark. I think he had 15 bad snaps in that game, which is incredible. You never see that. He was banged up last season. That did contribute to it. But just overall, his pass protection was really, really bad. So Harrison, he's not the best center in the league, and we still have to see if he is even average, but he's not what Spencer Long was last year. So that alone should be a huge help for the Jets. And they still were decent in pass protection last year. So adding Osemele, moving on from Long, should help them be pretty decent in pass protection. But the question mark is in the run game. That's where the Jets really struggled last year. They've been stuffed on more runs than any other team in the league over the past 2 seasons. And adding Le'Veon Bell should definitely help out with that. He's a guy who's been stuffed less than any other running back in the league. Obviously, playing in Pittsburgh helped out with that. But it was nice to see that because, like I mentioned earlier, Sam Darnold was throwing from so many 3rd and longs, and the early down run game was a huge issue that caused that. So adding Bell, a guy who has avoided being stuffed better than any other back in the league, was a great way to combat that issue. And adding Osemele as well should help a lot. The Raiders running in Osemele's direction while he was there were one of the most efficient rushing teams in the league. So Osemele should be a huge boost to a team that has really struggled with run blocking. The tackles, Brandon Shell, Kelvin Beachum, them in particular have really struggled to create some push in the run game. But adding Osemele, I think, moving on from Long, and also the Jets added a new offensive line coach in Frank Pollock, who was the O-line coach for the Bengals. He spent some time in Dallas and in Oakland, and really everywhere he's gone, his O-lines have performed pretty well. So I think Frank Pollock as the offensive line coach is an underrated addition. I think he's really going to make a positive impact on this group. And Brian Winters is a big-time wild card. He's a guy who he can make those highlight plays as an O-lineman. He's going to pancake some people. He is a nasty player. He's great in pass protection and helping out his guys in terms of finding something to do, putting people on the ground. He's a hard-nosed player, but he's really inconsistent. So we'll have to see what version of Brian Winters shows up this year. But overall, I think you add Osemele, a guy who is an all-pro level talent, struggled a little bit last year with injuries, but as long as he's healthy, he should be closer to his peak level that we've seen in the past. He should still be in his physical prime. So you add Osemele, move on from Spencer Long to a more athletic guy in Jonathan Harrison, and you add Frank Pollock at offensive line coach. Hopefully see a little bit of progression from Brandon Shell at right tackle. Obviously, every positive thing can happen, but overall, with the changes that have been made, I think this O-line can be decent this year.
Now let's have a quick look at the defense, and the defense has got the makings of a very good defense. I mean, a top defense. You add Quinnen Williams to Leonard Williams at the front, and Henry Anderson got signed to a contract in the off-season, brand new contract. Obviously, CJ Mosley being added in, and he'll play in the middle with Avery Williamson, so that's, I mean, I think they were they 20th against the run last season, but I mean, you add Mosley in there, that really shores that up. Obviously, Jamal Adams and Marcus May in the back. Tremaine Johnson was signed to an extension, and you added Brian Poole in there. And also the other draft picks that we mentioned before, Ja'Kai Polite, Blake Cashman in particular. And I think you look through all three levels, and I think it looks really, really good. Looks like it could be a defense to fear.
Yeah, this defense can definitely be really good. And if the Jets are going to be a good team this year, I think it's definitely going to be on the strength of that defense under Greg Williams now, too, coming over from Cleveland, is going to be really good. And definitely up front is where it starts. You look at that defensive line, put Quinnen Williams next to Leonard Williams. I think those two guys next to each other can be one of the best pairs of defensive linemen in the league. And Leonard Williams is a guy who is underrated because his sack totals aren't that great. He had 5 last year, 2 the year before that, but he creates a ton of pressure that doesn't get converted into sacks that often. Some of it's on him, some of it's bad luck, and a lot of it is just not playing with great players around him, allowing him to create those sacks, because he did have a 7-sack season a few years ago, but now playing next to Quinnen Williams, a guy who's going to demand a ton of attention, and a guy Quinnen Williams, I think, is going to come right in and be really good. I don't know if he'll show up in his sack totals right away, but you just look at him play. He's not just a physical freak guy who's really, really strong and huge, but his football IQ, just his technique, the way he's able to beat people with whether it's swim moves, arm under moves, just he's really got everything in the toolbox. So he can beat you with technique. He can beat you with speed, power. He's just a super smart, instinctive guy. So I think he's going to come right in and be able to use those physical tools. So you put those two guys next to each other, I think they're going to be a really good duo. Henry Anderson is a solid player in both the run and pass game. The inside linebacker duo is really good. Williamson and Mosley are going to absolutely plug up the run, those two guys together. And in coverage, Williamson isn't the best in coverage, but having Mosley is definitely going to help cover for that, because he is really good in coverage with his instincts and smarts overall. And a huge thing that I think Mosley is going to do is he's going to lessen the communication issues. The Jets last year gave up way too many big plays where someone was completely uncovered, but switching out Darren Lee for CJ Mosley at that inside linebacker spot, I think is going to really, really lessen the amount of issues the Jets have giving up those big plays. The Jets led the league in most 20-plus yard gains allowed on short passes last year, and the Ravens were last in the league. So hopefully Mosley can rub some of that off on this defense, and I think he will. And you look at the safety spot, Jamal Adams is obviously a superstar, one of, if not the best safety in the league, at worst, top 3 last year. With all the different things he's able to do, his coverage took off last season. He was really good in coverage last year. His run defense is great. As a blitzer, he's tremendous. So there's nothing Jamal Adams can't do. He's a stud. And Marcus May next to him can definitely make that one of the best duos at safety in the league. Hopefully May can stay healthy. He's already missing some time in training camp, but hopefully he can get back before the season, because May's a solid player next to Jamal Adams. He's a guy who is going to play that deep safety position really well, cover up those deep routes, and also lay some hits when he has to come down in the box and cover up for some mistakes underneath. He's a really big hitter as well. It's not just the coverage game, but those two guys together can be a great safety duo. On the edge, you have Jordan Jenkins, who really improved as a pass rusher last season. He came in as a guy known for run defense and toughness, but his pass rushing ability really improved last season. He had 7 sacks and 15 quarterback hits. So he really improved as a pass rusher, helping out a team that really needed some help at that position. And opposite him is where it gets interesting, because you have Ja'Kai Polite. We have to see what he does as a rookie. Obviously, his potential is sky high, but we'll see if he's able to break in right away and make that impact. Brandon Copeland, a guy who is a solid player, who isn't going to get huge sack totals or anything, but a guy who's just really tough and knows how to play his position. But so you look at that front seven and that safety spot, those two positions, if you look at just the linebackers, D-line and safety, that's up there with anybody. But cornerback is where the Jets really have some questions to answer. And if they can figure that out, then they can be really, really good, because you have Tremaine Johnson, a guy who has been a really solid player in the past. The Jets gave him a huge contract as a free agent last season to get him from the Rams, because he was a solid press corner with the Rams, but he did struggle a lot last year. He gave up some big plays over the top. Is mostly he's playing off a lot last season for some reason. He had some injury struggles. He kind of looked athletically limited at times, but really for the most part was just playing way off the line so much and giving up a lot of 10 to 15-yard first downs. So he definitely has to have a bounce-back season, but he is reuniting with Greg Williams, the guy who was his coach with the Rams when he had his best season. So hopefully that can help him out. At number 2, you have Darryl Roberts, a guy who's been kind of all over the place. He had some really good games last year. He had a game against the Vikings in which he covered both Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs and played really well. So I think 15 targets and gave up only about 60 yards. So he was really good in that game, but he also had some games where he struggled. But you look at cornerback overall in the NFL, I think inconsistency is just something you see a lot now, because it's becoming a really hard position to play with the rule changes and everything. So elite corners are harder to find. So I think that Tremaine Johnson is the huge X factor. If he can become even just solid, he doesn't have to be elite, but if he can just be at least a pretty good corner, a guy who you don't have to worry about completely canceling out anything the front seven does, as long as Greg Williams can help him reach close to that level that he was at his peak with the Rams, then I think the door is going to be open for the Jets to be really, really good on defense.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the strength of the front seven will help, for sure. Looking at 2019 and how the Jets are going to go, I mean, the downside of being in the AFC East is you play the Patriots twice, but the plus is that, I mean, the other teams in the AFC East are, pretty weak. You also have the Eagles, Steelers, and Browns on the schedule, but apart from that, the schedule is pretty favourable. What are your hopes in terms of how the Jets are going to do?
Yeah, so with the schedule, it's definitely it, and the schedule can change once the season starts. A lot of times you'll think it's difficult and it'll turn out easy. In 2015, that happened. We all thought it was going to be a super hard schedule for the Jets, but it turned out to be an absolute cakewalk. But looking at it on paper right now, it seems the Jets have the difficult stretch early on. They'll get the Browns in week 2 of their first 6 games against the Patriots. So they get those games unusually early on. So they'll have those 2 games early. They have the Browns week 2, and then in between, in their 4th and 5th games are against the Eagles and Cowboys. So that'll be 4 straight games against teams in the playoffs last year, plus the Browns. So it looks like they have a tough start. And then after that is where they have what looks like it could be a pretty soft stretch in the beginning of the season. They have the forget the order, but they do have the Jaguars, a couple of games against the Dolphins in the middle, Giants, Raiders, Bengals. So that could be the stretch right there where they could pick up some wins, but you never know how things can turn out. But overall, I think that with the Jets this season, you'd hope to see them make the playoffs. They definitely have the talent to do that. But, sometimes weird things happen. Sometimes you win 11, 10 games and you don't get in and you can't really control that. But at the least, I think it would be fair to expect the Jets to go at least 500. I think that should be the minimum expectation because this is a team that's won 5 or 4 games in each of the last 3 seasons. So they got to start taking a step forward soon. But the big thing is Sam Darnold, because if you find that quarterback, if he can be as good as we all hope he can be, then that can be the stabilizer that allows you to be competitive for a decade plus. So that's a huge thing as long as Sam Darnold develops. But this is still a team that can win, and you can't take anything for granted in the NFL. The Jets could have a window right now with the talent that they've added. You don't know how those deals are going to age with Bell, with Mosley, but right now on paper, they could have a really good shot if some things break right. And you never know when the Patriots are going to start breaking down, if that's going to start happening soon with Gronkowski out. You never know. So I think the Jets do have the talent to at least go 500. That should be the expectation. I think they'll win. I think 9 wins is about where I'd stand right now. Will that be enough to get into the playoffs? I don't know. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not. A couple of years ago, the Bills and the Titans made the playoffs with 9 wins. And then a couple of years before that, the Jets won 10 games and they didn't get in. So I think 8 wins should be the bare minimum that should be expected of them. I think 9 is about where I'd put them. And as a best case, I could see 10, 11 wins. If Sam Darnold really takes a huge jump this year, if the question marks on defense are answered and the Jets are a top 5 kind of defense overall, if cornerback can figure itself out, if their front 7 is really good, Jamal Adams keeps up what he did last year, it can be a top 5 defense. So if Sam Darnold takes off, defense is really good, the skill positions stay healthy and fulfill their potential and look like one of the deepest groups in the league, this can be a really good team. I think that ceiling is there this year. But as a middle ground, I think 9 wins is what I'd predict from them right now. I think Sam Darnold elevates to pretty good this year. I think he'll have an above-average season, not quite elite yet. And Sam Darnold was 21 last year. He's the youngest starter, youngest Week 1 starter in history. So he's got time to figure it out. He's still younger. He'll be younger on opening day next year than Baker Mayfield was when he made his debut as a rookie. So Sam Darnold's got time to take, a few incremental leaps towards reaching his peak. So I think this year he'll be not quite elite yet. He definitely can get there. I think there's a good chance he does, but I think he'll be pretty good this season, take a good lead. The defense will be a top 10 level. And I think 9 games were what I'd predict for them this year. And like I said, I think 500, 8-8 should be the minimum expectation. I think anything less than that probably is a little disappointing given the money that they spent, but still the big key is just going to be Sam Darnold and hopefully seeing that he can prove that he can be the guy to lead this team for a really long time.
Nice. And yeah, I was going to, before you mentioned it, I was going to say Sam Darnold's so young, I mean, you've really got so, apart from the other sort of pieces that are coming in and out, I mean, quarterback's such an important position in the NFL. And, it looks like you've got your quarterback of the future. Let's hope. It looks that way for sure. You've got him for next, 18 years, hopefully?
I hope so. And, like you said, being so young, that it's a huge advantage. It gives him some time to kind of it gives him some time to develop. You don't expect him to come in right away and be good. And he had one of the best 21-year-old seasons last year. There haven't been a lot of 21-year-old quarterbacks, but he did a lot of things last year that other 21-year-old quarterbacks just haven't done. So hopefully he can take that huge leap this year.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not making a comparison to Tom Brady, but you see how Bill Belichick runs that New England team. All those other pieces are interchangeable. He just moves players in and out, and gets journeyman players and takes advantage of sort of cheap free agents and all this sort of thing. Just building around terrific Tom, basically.
Yeah, and once you get your quarterback, then that's what you can do. And you see it with other quarterbacks, too, in the league who've been elite, with guys like Drew Brees, guys like Phillip Rivers, who have seen the rest of the team completely just go through different phases, but they're still there through it all, keeping the team competitive. So hopefully Darnold can be that guy. That's who the Jets have been looking for decades on end. So it seems like he can be. He definitely does have the potential to be that. The Jets did a lot of work this offseason to help him fulfill that potential with the work they did at the skill positions with Bell and Crowder, with what they did on the offensive line, hitting in Adam Gase. And Adam Gase is a guy who, for all of his faults as a head coach in Miami, one thing that he has consistently done well throughout his entire coaching career in the NFL is coach quarterbacks. Every quarterback that he's coached, he's done a really good job with. And it goes all the way back to when he was an assistant in Detroit and he was coaching John Kitna. He went from Kitna to Peyton Manning to Tim Tebow to even Ryan Tannehill had some of his best. Ryan Tannehill made the playoffs with Adam Gase. So Adam Gase has done some really good work with quarterbacks everywhere he's gone. His quarterbacks have generally played a lot better than they did over the rest of their careers without him. So hopefully that continues to an even greater extent with Darnold. But the Jets did a lot of good work to help support Darnold this season after kind of struggling to do that last season. But going forward, he does have a good infrastructure around him. So we'll see if he can take advantage, and he's going to have a great opportunity to do that this year.
To round us out, Michael, one question. We're going to fast forward 12 months. What I'd like you to do is to write a headline for the 2019 Jets season.
Wow. All right. So I think I'm kind of formulating something. I think I'd go with something like, the Jets season ends abruptly, but future is bright. Something like that.
Nice.
I think you'll see even if they do make the playoffs, maybe they sneak in one win. It happens sometimes, but it might even just be a wild card exit after a tough game or a close game against a really good team. But I think they'll get a winning record this year. They'll either narrowly miss the playoffs or make the playoffs, win maybe one game, or maybe even just exit the first round. But whatever happens, I think that the Jets are going to come out of the season, even if they weren't close to a Super Bowl yet this year. I think they're going to come out of the season feeling like next year the Super Bowl window really opens.
Fantastic. Michael, thank you so much for your time, and you did come on at very short notice. Thank you. Appreciate it. People can definitely check out your work at Gangrene Nation, Elite Sports New York. Sorry. They can check out the Cool Your Jets podcast, and they can give you a follow at Michael_Nania as well. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
No, it's been fantastic, and I'll let you enjoy your Wednesday, and I'm about to hit the sack, so thank you so much.
All right, thanks for having me.
Cheers. All the best. Well, that was awesome talking to Michael. He certainly knows his Jets, and it's going to be an exciting year. Lots of things to see, and as you know, when G and I looked at the quarterback rookie class last year, Sam Darnold was our number one quarterback. We were very high on Darnold, and I think he's just going to go up in leaps and bounds. Let's hope. And the defense is going to be fantastic, especially that D-line. All right, hope you enjoyed that. That was our New York Jets preview. Dropping lots at the moment, so they're going to keep on coming. On behalf of G and myself, thanks for listening, everybody. And till next time, we'll catch you later.